Imagine a nation holding its breath. The radio crackles to life, not with music, but with the stern martial anthem you hoped you'd never hear. A voice, cold and unfamiliar, announces the suspension of the Constitution. The government has been dissolved. A new order is in place. This isn't a scene from a movie. For millions of people across the 20th century, this was the terrifying dawn of a military dictatorship. A military dictatorship is one of history's most brutal forms of governance. It's a system where the armed forces don't just defend the country, they rule it. Power isn't won through a ballot box. It's seized through a coup d'état, a sudden, violent overthrow of the existing government. Once in control, the military, often led by a small group of high-ranking officers known as a junta, becomes the ultimate authority. Civil liberties, the freedoms you take for granted speech, press, assembly are among the first casualties. The law is no longer what's written in a constitution, but what is decreed by the ruling general. But how does a country get to this point? How does the institution meant to protect its citizens end up turning its guns on them? It rarely happens in a vacuum. The seeds of a coup are sown in times of profound crisis. Picture a nation crippled by economic collapse, where hyperinflation makes a lifetime of savings worthless overnight. Imagine a political system paralyzed by corruption and infighting, where citizens lose all faith in their leaders. Add to this widespread civil unrest, with protests and strikes bringing the country to a standstill. In this cauldron of chaos, the military often presents itself as the only force capable of restoring order, the only institution disciplined enough to save the nation from itself. They claim to be reluctant saviors, stepping in temporarily to cleanse the system. But history shows us that power, once seized, is seldom given up willingly. It's crucial we understand this history, not as a dry academic exercise, but as a story of profound human suffering. Military dictatorships leave scars that last for generations. They operate on a foundation of fear. When the state has a monopoly on violence and is willing to use it against its own people, silence becomes the safest response. Political opponents, activists, journalists, students, and even artists are targeted. They are arrested without charge, tortured for information, and sometimes they simply vanish. These are the desaparecidos, the disappeared, whose families are left in a state of agonizing uncertainty, never knowing the fate of their loved ones. This climate of terror atomizes society, breaking the bonds of trust between neighbors and even family members. The long-term trauma echoes for decades, shaping a nation's politics, culture, and collective memory. Long after the uniforms have left the presidential palace, the concept of a single leader taking absolute power in a crisis isn't new. In ancient Rome, a dictator was a magistrate appointed by the Senate during a state of emergency. He was given total authority to deal with the threat, but his power was temporary, limited to 6 months. The idea was to have a decisive leader for a short period, after which he would step down and normal governance would resume. Cincinnatus famously did just that, returning to his farm after saving Rome. But over time, figures like Sulla and, most famously, Julius Caesar, stretched this temporary power into something permanent, paving the way for the end of the Republic. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the nature of dictatorship changed. The Cold War, in particular, created a fertile ground for military takeovers. The United States and the Soviet Union, locked in an ideological struggle, often prioritized stability and anti-communist allegiance over democracy. They supported and sometimes even helped orchestrate coups in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, propping up friendly dictators who would serve their geopolitical interests. Nowhere was this phenomenon more tragically pronounced than in Latin America during the 1970s. Let's go to Chile, September 11, 1973. On that morning, General Augusto Pinochet launched a violent coup against the democratically elected socialist president, Salvador Allende. Fighter jets bombed the presidential palace. Allende, defiant to the end, refused to surrender. By the end of the day, he was dead, and Pinochet was in power. What followed was 17 years of brutal repression. The National Stadium in Santiago was turned into a massive concentration camp and torture center. Thousands were executed or disappeared. Pinochet's regime, advised by economists known as the Chicago Boys, implemented radical free market reforms. While some praised the so-called economic miracle of Chile, it came at the cost of immense human suffering and deep inequality. A few years later, in neighboring Argentina, a similar nightmare unfolded. In 1976, a military junta led by General Jorge Videla seized power, initiating what they called the national reorganization process. It was, in reality, a campaign of state-sponsored terror known as the Dirty War. The junta's goal was to eliminate all perceived left-wing subversion. Their methods were horrifically systematic. Special task forces operated out of clandestine detention centers like the infamous Navy School of Mechanics. People were abducted from their homes, from their workplaces, in the middle of the night. They were tortured, and an estimated 30,000 were killed. Many of them thrown from airplanes into the Atlantic Ocean in what became known as death flights. But even in the darkest of times, courage finds a way. In Argentina, a group of grieving mothers began to gather in the Plaza de Mayo, the main square in Buenos Aires, right in front of the presidential palace. They wore white headscarves and carried pictures of their missing children. At first, there were just a handful. The authorities dismissed them as Las Locas, the crazy women, but they kept coming, week after week. Their silent protest, a powerful accusation against a regime that denied the very existence of the disappeared. The mothers of the Plaza de Mayo became a global symbol of resistance, their bravery showing the world the human cost of the junta's rule. Their unwavering demand for answers, where are they, helped to erode the dictatorship's legitimacy from within and without. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the era of the classic military junta began to wane. The end of the Cold War removed the ideological justification that superpowers had used to support them. International pressure mounted, with sanctions and diplomatic isolation making it harder for these regimes to survive. More importantly, popular resistance grew. Decades of repression had not extinguished the desire for freedom. In Chile, Pinochet, overconfident in his power, held a plebiscite in 1988, expecting the people to vote to extend his rule. They courageously voted no, paving the way for a return to democracy. In Argentina, the junta's disastrous decision to invade the Falkland Islands led to a humiliating military defeat, shattering their credibility and forcing them from power. Today, overt military rule by a general in sunglasses and a crisp uniform is far less common. But this doesn't mean the military has retreated from politics entirely. The form has evolved. In some nations, we see a more subtle model, a hybrid regime where democratic institutions exist on the surface, but the military still wields enormous influence behind the scenes. They may control key sectors of the economy, hold veto power over civilian politicians, or maintain a deep state network that ensures their interests are protected. They may not rule by decree, but they ensure no government can rule without their blessing. This tutelary democracy is a modern-day ghost of the old dictatorships, a reminder that the struggle for genuine civilian rule and true democracy is an ongoing process. The history of military dictatorships is a sobering chronicle of ambition, ideology, and violence. It's a story of institutions designed for protection, turning into instruments of oppression. But it is also, and perhaps more importantly, a story of incredible resilience. It's the story of the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, of the Chilean voters who dared to say no, and of countless unnamed individuals who risked everything to keep the dream of freedom alive in the face of tyranny. Understanding this past is not about dwelling in darkness. It's about recognizing the fragility of liberty and the eternal vigilance required to protect it. Thank you for joining us on the History of Things. If you found this story important, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. For more deep dives into the objects and ideas that have shaped our world,